Dear listeners, welcome to the Review of Democracy book presentation series. I'm your host today, Adrian Matus, editor of RevDem, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our series of live events co-organized by the CEO Review of Books and Review of Democracy. Today, we're focusing on a fascinating and timely volume, Flowing Progress, Transforming the Danube through Infrastructure, edited by Ștefan Dorondel and Luminița Gătejel, and published this year by Purdue University Press. We are truly honored to host both editors, Luminița Gătejel and Ștefan Dorondel, along with two distinguished respondents, Cosmin Cosor-Codrea and Herr Doisings. Let me briefly introduce you the guests. Luminița Gătejel is a senior researcher at the Leibniz Institute for East and Southeast European Studies in Regensburg. Her work explores the history of automobility, everyday life, and consumption in the Eastern Bloc. Her most recent book, Engineering the Lower Danube, examines how technology and politics shaped one of Europe's most dynamic rivers. Ștefan Dorondel is an anthropologist and environmental historian affiliated with Francis I. Reiner Institute of Anthropology and the Institute for Southeast European Studies of Romanian Academy. His research explores rivers and wetlands, infrastructure, rewilding, and ecological restoration, all crucial themes in understanding human-environment interactions today. Our respondents will provide fresh and critical insights about the topic. First, Gerd Doisings is professor of social anthropology at the University of Regensburg. His fieldwork across Southeastern Europe has illuminated the complex interplay of religion, identity, and memory in post-socialist societies. Amongst his influential works are Religion and the Politics of Identity in Kosovo, and History and Memory in Eastern Bosnia. He also taught a captivating course at the College of Europe in Natolin, titled Flow and Friction Along the Danube, Globalization and its Discontents, which I believe is strongly connected to today's topic. Cosmin Cosor-Codrea is a researcher at the New Europe College and Romania's regional representative in the European Society for Environmental History. He defended his PhD at the Oxford Brookes University, and his research spans the social history of science, environmental history, scientific racism, and the popularization of science. Again, his perspective will be invaluable in providing a critical standpoint about the volume. Let me walk you a bit through the structure of the upcoming hour. First, our editors will introduce the book. This will take about 12 minutes in total. Then our respondents will share their reflections and comments. After that, the editors will have the chance to respond. And finally, we'll open the floor to your questions. Those who are online, make sure that you write the comments in the chat section of the live stream. I will gather them and I will address them to the editors. Once again, a warm welcome to all our guests and to everyone watching and listening. Now, let's begin with Flowing Progress, Transforming the Danube through Infrastructure. First, I would like to invite Luminița Gătejel to introduce the book.
Thank you so much for this invitation, for organizing this, and also for the kind introduction. This project, like probably most projects that will be presented here, started during the pandemic. And because of this, we started more or less backwards, talking a lot about methodology before going in the field, before going to the archives. So I can really say this in the name of everybody and also in the name of Stefan present here, that we are very glad that we finally, managed to have this volume out. And just as another starting point, the framework for this volume in terms of finances was provided by the Leibniz Association, and it was in terms of an international consortium of researchers. Stefan was one of the main partners, but also Constantin Ardeleanu and Constantin Iordache, the first one in Bucharest, the second one at CEU, who were also part of these core members of the and are also contributors to the volume. But besides that, we had many more other authors and contributors involved beyond this project. So I will move and talk a little bit about the content of the book. Some of us have been longer engaged with the Danube for several years, sometimes even for more than several years, and we were painfully aware of the gaps in the literature. And because of this, we tried, to fill as much as possible in what was a volume of these gaps, and to try to show this very multi-layered history of the Danube in quite a few distinct settings. And I think it was, our ambition to have it as broad and as vast as possible. And I would try to explain in a little bit what I mean by this. I will focus on three aspects, and then I guess Stefan would talk more about the methodological part of the Danube. And the three aspects that I picked out today is first, the interdisciplinarity of this volume. Second, that we try to focus on this, combination of time, space, but also scale. And the third is that we, from the outset, were trying to have a contribution to something that we call as transnational area studies. Maybe just a few lines on these two aspects. The most obvious, multidisciplinary approach of the volume is this combination of historical studies and anthropological research. But also, if one would look more closely to the volume, we have several contributions from environmental history, especially our Viennese colleagues who looked more carefully on the geography and morphology of the rivers, the Gertrud Heidvogel and Severin Hohensinner and Martin Schmidt, who tried to have this long-term perspective of changes on the Austrian Danube, but also quite a while this interdisciplinary aspect was also very much informed by methodologies from science and technology studies, especially with regard to the concept of infrastructure and its implementation. Second, in terms of time, space, and scale, we definitely tell a story of modern transformation, and that's why the bulk of the case studies focus on the 19th, 20th, and 21st century. Nonetheless, we were also very much interested in the early modern period. We had two Ottomanists, colleagues also from Vienna, Onur Inal and Denis Akto, who focused on the Ottoman Danube in the 15th to the 17th century. And for us, it was an important foil to look into this timeline, into this, to try to define what is the specificity of this modern and later experience, but also to trace continuities that stretch from pre-modern times to modern times and even post-modern times, if one wants. And also in terms of space, we try to incorporate the upper, the middle, and the lower Danube in our case studies. but also to trace this evolution from imperial times to nation state, but also look beyond and below the nation state, to look at international river commissions or the European Union, but also to look at regional regions and even small villages and towns along the Danube. And we also try to combine, as I mentioned in the Viennese case, these very long-term case studies with shorter case studies, just focusing on one dramatic event, maybe in just a few days or maybe just a few months, and to see how these various perspectives focus and clash sometimes with each other, but also complement each other. Um, and the third aspect is this transnational aspect, as the river itself going beyond borders and confines of any kind. I think this was important for us, not only because it is obvious that the Danube does not stop at any political border, but also in terms of mental maps and also of physical borders, that the Danube goes beyond the Iron Curtain. So this is not only a contribution to Eastern or Southeastern European studies, but to a much larger European region on the other hand. But we also took, the river seriously, and we tried also to see and ask quite consciously, where does the river end? It doesn't end at the political border, but it also doesn't end where the water stops, or at least seemingly the water stops and the dry land starts. So in this context, we looked at the Danube, but also we looked at the communities around the Danube and what did for them the Danube mean. And I will finish with this, that in various areas and also in various other time settings, the Danube meant different things. Sometimes the Danube was just a catastrophic flood, but sometimes it was the river basin. It was the Danube and the tributaries and the importance to a certain empire and to a certain nation state. Uh, on the other hand, um, it could also be simply the floodplain, so something that maybe in the meantime disappeared, but due to maybe a catastrophic event, this floodplain, in especially in the article of Stefan Dorondel, all of a sudden resurfaced, although it was long forgotten in the memories, but also in the physical space. So I guess I will leave it here with this introductory remarks.
Thank you very much for the very clear and very comprehensive introduction, and for naming the contributors, the topic, and the approach. Now I will pass the word to Stefan Dorondel, the second editor.
Thank you. Well, I guess this collection explores the relations between or among the Danube River, communities that live on the banks of the river, and various state bodies, be them national or supranational, and how this relationship is actually mediated through technoscience, but especially through infrastructure. And infrastructure is obviously a key word here because we have it in the title as well. And basically all chapters deal with infrastructure. So what thing we kind of aimed at was to do justice to this absolutely passionate varieties of historical, political, cultural context you find along the river's banks. And there are multiple lessons. I think we try to kind of, hint at. And one is that if we want now to reverse the ecological damages we incurred to the river in the last at least 200 years, I think we need to thoroughly investigate when and how this damage occurred, in which historical, economic, and political circumstances uh, humans infrastructured the river in order to tame it. And I think recent devastating floods uh, have led us to examine flood mitigation strategies from a rather long historical perspective in order to extend to which contemporary floods are indeed so to understand how these floods are indeed without precedent. And I will come back to this kind of circled relationship between infrastructure, people, state, uh, events or different processes, and then again because that's why we used the term disturbance, which kind of tries to organize analytically the entire volume. I will come back to that, and I think we try to present stories that kind of um, talks and capture the transformation of this river as a whole. And we should keep in mind that the Danube is the most international river in the world, crossing like 10 countries. And so we trace these changes over several centuries, as Luminica mentioned, and we look at the tools, ideas, how this transformation has to occur, how people reacted, how they actually asked for these changes, um, and I think in as I said, the volume adds to already a rich environmental history literature about the Danube. This concept of disturbance, um, as I said, we try to show to use disturbance as an analytical tool in order to analyze the long-term dynamic between humans' attempts to control the Danube, the material systems that were implemented to achieve these goals, and then the agency of the river that enabled the functioning of infrastructure, but at the same time it brought breakdown of such arrangements. And I'd like to kind of stop here a bit to say that I think what we also we enlightened a bit better than other works. Um, we enlightened the fact that communities themselves actually asked the help and the intervention of state, the infrastructure intervention of the state. So basically, this volume can be read as a sort of reverse of what we know from, James Scott's Seeing Like a State, in which the state is the one which kind of imposes different modernizing projects to uh, put uh, messy things at local level in order. And I should say that I mean I'm a huge fan of Seeing Like a State. It's one of my my books. I work with Jim Scott, so I want to be very clear in that. So I'm actually glad we kind of took this kind of, it's too much to say anti-Scott, but in a way we kind of, it's a volume which could be easily opposed to seeing like a state. As I said, one of my a, a book which highly influenced me, and to which I return very often when I feel lost. So um, I would like to talk a bit about the disturbance, because this is, again, as I said, it's an analytical tool we used, and it was used um, decades ago, first in ecological sciences, and it for them it meant, for ecologists, it meant a natural process that affects, organisms, species, landscapes, ecosystems, and can be cataclysmic, or can be, just very discrete, or can be a short-term disturbance, like a chemical spillover, for instance, or can be a long-term, say humans diverting an entire river. And some anthropologists, like Anna Tsing, for instance, used the term, uh, especially she used it in several circumstances a lot. She uses this term in Mushroom at the End of the World, her 2015 book, which is absolutely fabulous book. But she uses it without kind of problematizing or theorizing um, this concept. So um, we what we try to do when we thought to use this term was to look at the kind of spiral development, uh, relationship between humans and river develop in a kind of spiral way. So um, humans perceive floods as a disturbance, and then they try to mitigate floods through infrastructure, so building higher dams, building higher levees. And then in the next decade, you see stronger floods affecting even more people, and humans, like states and other bodies, try again to implement to build other infrastructures in order to mitigate, to tame the river. So this is a sort of, a sort of spiral relationship. So disturbance, what we perceive as disturbance, humans from the river perceive the infrastructure as disturbance, and then we have this spiral relationship, which uh, uh, it 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 can be good for humans. That's I think our point. Maybe I'm not sure how much time we still have, but I can stop here and then say more words, or engaging in discussion, other points I would like to make regarding our book, our collection.
Thank you very much, Stefan Rondel. Indeed, the book focuses on the political and economical infrastructure of the water, as you very clearly mentioned. And the readers, it's very important to mention that the book is available in open access, and the readers can read, those who are watching online can read the expansion and the explanation of the concept of this disturbance from page 2 to page 6 on the introduction. Again, it's very clearly expanded and very clearly explained, and you're highly encouraged to see how the concept unfolds, because it's actually a very, very interesting approach. Again, the seeing like a state, it's very crucial, and again, it's explained to a certain extent and in the introduction, which again our viewers online can check it later on. Now I will pass the word to our first respondent, Cosmin Kosor Kondrea. You have the word. We cannot hear you, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you, Adi, for the invitation, and congratulations again, Luminica and Stefan, for the book and also for all your contributors, which provided very good chapters. And sorry for my small dot on my uh, glasses. It's not the reflection of the Danube, it's something from the lights from my laptop. So I will try to just keep a distance from this. So I really enjoy reading the book, which brings, I think, a huge contribution to the field of environmental history, given that up until now, most of the studies have focused mostly on political and economic history of the Danube, leaving aside the ecological transformation. And the environmental history of the Danube is indeed a growing field. Just since the publication of this book, we have several other important studies, such as the one of Robert Mevison, the Danube Empire, and recently Francesco Magno's article published on the communist Bulgaria and the exploitation of hydropower of the lower Danube. So it's a growing field, and everybody is focusing on the Danube, and I really enjoy reading all these contributions. And returning to the discussion, the volume greatly overcomes various linguistic barriers and explores the relationship between the Danube, riparian populations, and various national and international state bodies as mediated by infrastructure and technoscience over a period of 200 years. And it uses, as Luminica and Stefan already mentioned, combined methodologies from environmental history, anthropology, history, and alongside with science and technology studies. And the book also assesses the scale of political, social, economic, and ecological transformations. What sets it apart is also the volume captures the transformation of the river as a whole, overcoming the fractures which we are used with in regular studies with upper the Danube, middle Danube, and lower Danube. So it offers like a whole picture of what happened during the last 200 years. As Stefan already mentioned, the volume adds to existing analytical tools on the concept of disturbance, which, as the author mentioned, denotes the long-term dynamic between human attempts to control the Danube and the material system they implemented to achieve these goals and the agency of the river itself. Like following, as Stefan mentioned, Anna Tsing's work on multi-species studies and also the work of Sarah Pritchard that developed the terms of hydro-imperialism and hydro-capitalism, which are very important, at least for Stefan, I think, for his explanation of his chapter. And I will just say a few words about some case studies about the chapters, which I really enjoyed reading. The book starts with a chapter written by Deniz Armagan and Onur Ünal, which examines the way in which the Ottoman Empire coexisted with the river natural flow and which was based on riparian local knowledge. In comparison with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman tried to adapt to the river flow instead of trying to regulate it. Also, another chapter deals with the microhistory event written by Luminica Ghitegel, which uncovers during the 1940s, when after a devastating flood, the citizens of Giurgiu asked the ruling Wallachian administration to intervene and help them. This makes the case in point of critics of James Scott seeing like the state. A similar important chapter was written by Constantin Ardeleanu, who dealt with the tension between economic and ecological interest in the Danube Delta during the 19th century. We all know the European Commission of the Danube entrusted Charles Hartley to coordinate hydraulic works in order to increase shipping traffic, and which interfered with the technical system constructed by Romanian state to improve the fish stocks by Grigore Antipa. Another great chapter is the one on geopolitical reconfiguration after imperial dissolution, which played a significant role in Stephen Jobbit's exploration of how Hungarian geographers and hydrological experts portrayed the territorial loss of Trianon Treaty as a natural disturbance, like they perceived the geography of Hungarian kingdom as a natural unit. So this is another layer of disturbance. Important in many ways, the next chapters dealing with the state socialism show how countries pursued the same high modernist agenda as their capitalist counterparts. The chapter of Constantinu Iordache on the pharaonic implementation of transformation of the Danube in Romania and other regulations. Also, Stefan de Rondel's chapter further investigates what happened to socialist infrastructure after the dissolution of the socialist bloc. Stefan argues that the flooding from 2006 was the result of misunderstanding of pre-socialist environmental infrastructure, a human-made process reflecting the neoliberal political economy that had governed the exploitation of the Danube since the 1989. So in terms of critical remarks, I just have from my own research some and my own readings some examples that might have been included. It is important to know that in Romania, since the turn of the 20th century, the state established several overlapping institutions. As to continue Constantin Ardeleanu's argument, in 1910, the law on the development of floodplains was promulgated, which established the Land Improvement Service in Romania and focused on building levees and draining the floodplains. So the same institution overlapped and finally took over the work of Grigore Antipa and the State Fisheries Service. And after 1 year, another service was established in Romania called the Special Irrigation Service, which was incorporated in the previous one, in the Land Improvement Service. And this one's already just survived 1 year, and in the end, it vanished. So then again, during the same period, the Land Improvement Service also entered in conflicts with the state's fishery, as I said, and the engineer Ion Vidrașcu, who has a dedicated name for building levees from Vidra Vidrașcu, I don't know, argued that the fishery service headed by Antipa did not have a systematic approach to flooding. Instead of deciding either levees with agricultural lands or ponds for fishing, they instead followed the principle of obtaining the maximum yield with the minimum of expenses and responsibilities. And Vidrașcu already had this argument that Stefan was already told you about, that as you increase the levees, the flood will come and so on. You will have areas that weren't drowned before, and they will start flooded by the levees. And also from a global perspective, Ion Vidrașcu connected the Danube with the catastrophic floods of Mississippi from 1927. He noted that serious systematic and costly measurements have been made in the US. The engineers there made detailed hydrographic plans in relation to the course of the floods, the possibility of dam breaks, and infiltration to underground water. Nevertheless, they did not prevent several catastrophic floods. Whereas in Romania, not even half of these measurements were done. But okay, they started to build the levee system. Also, speaking of the Mississippi, an important transformation which began there for reclaiming floodplains was for cotton and sugar was driven by the oppressive system of chattel slavery. So what I want to say here, although it's indifferent in many ways or different, the connection between the Danube and the institution of enslavement in the Romanian principalities might give also several new research paths, I believe. For instance, Giulietta Rotaru has shown that after various floods between May and June, Roma gold washer known as Rudar and Zlatar and enslaved by local monasteries were the ones who carried their activities on the Danube's tributary rivers of Old Argeș and were working in hard-working conditions. Also, relation to the Talveg. For instance, in the book, we know that it is said that the Talveg was the official boundary between the Romanian principalities and the Ottoman administration. For Roma community, the Talveg meant the border between bondage and freedom, as there were many cases when they show resistance by crossing the Danube from the Romanian principalities before the beginning of the 19th century. And I will just have a few questions for the authors. I'm curious of other disturbances which are closely connected with floods, such as famines and epidemics, which occur after floods. In addition, also, I'm curious of the relationship between deforestation, mountain erosion, and torrents on tributary rivers, which I presume had an impact on the Danube floods. I'm also interested if the authors can provide more information about how the practice of ecology itself has changed the transformation of the Danube, namely the dichotomy between invasive and native species portrayed in scientific literature, which I know that Stefan worked on the invasive species of the Danube. Another question is related to the impact of militarization and nuclear power plants that were built on the Danube, which I think is very important nowadays. As we speak, we have several problems with this. And from a non-human perspective, I was intrigued by Ion Vidrașcu, who highlighted that the importance of rat galleries and foxes that were capable of causing levees to break even at a moderate water level. He said that it is enough to make a small ditch through the levee system, and the water will complete the work carried by other species. So I'm just curious if you encounter any other species that were breaking the levees, that were like levees were disturbing their own habitat and so on. Thank you again for the invitation, and congratulations, Stefan and Luminica, and thank you, Adi.
Thank you, Cosmin, for the very clear and very, very good questions. So to sum up, the questions addressed by Cosmin were about a clarification about the concept of disturbance, the impact of deforestation, the practice of ecology, the impact of militarization, and the impact of some species according to the case of Ion Vidrașcu, if I understood correctly. Now, before you respond to these questions, I would pass the word to Professor Gerd Duijsings to provide his insight about the volume.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, of course, compliments and congratulations to the editors of the journal and the authors of the book, and the authors of the book. For me, it's great to have this type of book, not in the form, not having a sort of a history of the Danube in a more, as a more conventional river biography, let's say, but rather a self-conscious theoretical approach inspired by science technology studies and actor network theory, looking at the transformation of a large European river through infrastructure and the assemblages that result from that. So I think that's the key contribution the book makes. I'm not going to go into much detail now because I think time is running. I think the clear focus on the infrastructuring of an important European river is a very important contribution to the literature. I like the focus indeed on tackling various types of disturbances and dramatic events. Floods are particularly, I think, prominent in the book, which always have very important political implications also through and through infrastructure. These issues are sometimes or are often sort of addressed. I think this concept of disturbance is a very elegant way to actually bring the chapters together under a common denominator. While I was reading, I actually remembered, just to give you one example, that I was pretty, thinking about a lot in about a decade ago, the 2014 floods in Bosnia and Serbia, which were kind of an interesting example of such a combined disturbance, where one could see that not only the floods were a disturbance in terms of destroying people's homes and livelihoods, but also in terms of that the old enmities disappeared temporarily, and the narratives about inadequate political elites incapable of dealing with the floods constituted a kind of threat to the new political order dominated by nationalist politicians. So this was a very interesting moment in recent Balkan history where you could see that flooding, so the role of rivers and politics became very, very clearly intersected. So my comments are much less fine-grained and are more conceptual. So my first comment or question sort of pertains to the role of the state and the issue of governance. large engineering projects. As a Dutch national, I almost grew up with the threat of water and the way a state like the Netherlands has dealt with this. This is kind of relevant to my first point. I can't remember actually where I read this, but it may have been James Scott's Seeing Like a State, or Jürgen Osterhammer's The Transformation of the World, where I read something about the role of the state in water management and hydraulics. I mean, I'm sure that Osterhammer writes about this. It's a very long history of the 19th century. Which in a way shows how the 19th century gave an impetus to hydraulic engineering. Often the state is seen as the only force strong enough to implement such projects. And I think Stefan already pointed at that local communities somehow, solicit the state, ask the state to intervene in such cases. And because of the scaling up of infrastructure, large scales of intervention that are needed. And I think, thinking, I believe one of the two, Scott or Osterhammer, refers to pre-modern China, for instance, being a classical example of a state that was highly centralized. And whether it's Osterhammer or Scott, I don't know this anymore, compares this with the decentralized case of the Netherlands, which shows that it apparently does not always require a very centralized state to implement such infrastructural projects. So what does the example of the Danube tell us? It's a politically rather fragmented river, at least in major parts of its history, cut through by political borders. In terms of, and so what does this mean in terms of hydraulic engineering and the coordination of such efforts? That's my first point. Adrian, my second point, Adrian already mentioned, I'm teaching a course on the Danube, which actually doesn't deal really with these infrastructural issues so much. The concept of this course is that I'm arguing really the Danube is fundamentally a European river, although it is quite different from the Rhine in terms of its geopolitical embeddedness, its economic centrality, and the imaginary around it. So it's a river, the Danube is a river that gravitates towards Europe's periphery. And in that sense, it's almost like a Rhine in reverse. The Rhine has one of the largest ports of the world at the North Sea, and hardly anything similar one finds at the Black Sea. So how does the Rhine compare with the Danube, also in terms of geopolitics and its intersection with infrastructural interventions? That's my second question. My third remark or comment refers to Anna Tsing and her work, actually on a refers to her book, Friction. So I'm using actually another book by Tsing here, where she actually speaks about globalization as a contradictory process. It provokes contradictory responses, which she kind of details in her book, Friction. She uses the term flow is critical of this liquid metaphor and replaces it or sort of complements it with the concept of friction, which pertains to the parochial interests or attempts to ward off global influences and to control and channel global flows and defend local interests. So I think in the work of Tsing, you can see that globalization is a very complex entanglement of multiple, unstable, overlapping, contradictory global processes. And this notion of friction undermines the idea of unimpeded flow, which is dominant in the literature on globalization. And so my question is really, to what extent were infrastructural projects on the Danube actually trying to bring an element of friction into this infrastructural bracket? So to what extent are the channeling and controlling of flows, not only of water flows, but also of goods and people, actually part of this modernist project? This has to do with my fourth point. I also, while I'm teaching this course, I always point at the fact that the Danube is not only a river, it's also a border. It's a state border in some of its stretches, segments. And I would say there's an infrastructural dimension to this too. So during Cold War, we all know some stretches of the river were part of the Iron Curtain, which actually sounds pretty infrastructural too. And so this border issue may be a complicated one also, as rivers may change their course, for example, and then all sorts of frictions or conflicts emerge between two states that border on the river. So my question would be, so how does the infrastructural role of a river as a waterway or highway, clash or intersect with its role as a border? So I have a small point that I would like perhaps to finish with now, and that's to what extent, in talking about modernist projects, of which this is, I would say, part, to what extent is Eisenstadt's concept of multiple modernities actually useful in this context or relevant? Are these multiple modernities visible in the infrastructural interventions that you're covering in the book, in terms of competing infrastructures, for example? Or do the latter largely converge in terms of engineering, for example, the technical parts, the technical aspects of these infrastructural interventions? So that's what I had to say and to ask. I'm curious, of course, what the answers to these questions would be.
Professor Doings, thank you very much for the intervention, very clear. And for the comparison and for the contextualization, you compare and contrast the case with Bosnia, with the Netherlands, and also with the Rhine, which again, it's very useful to keep in mind. In terms of the questions, some of the points that were addressed was the concept of friction, if I understood correctly. Then the clash, the notion of the river as a border versus as a highway. Again, it's an interesting point. And the concept of multiple modernities, to what extent this framework is useful or not. In this now, the editors can respond to the questions in the order that you decide.
If I may, I just want to touch some. I'm pretty sure we will not be able to respond to all questions, because that means an extra hour probably. But very short about the Rhine and Danube. They are comparable. They are different in many ways. Here you probably know very well. Danube was never part of the sort of national saga in Romania or in Bulgaria, for instance. It's forest, Carpathians, yes, but never Danube. That's an interesting point, as opposed to Rhine. But what they are almost similar, not similar 100%, but almost similar, is that they are both what Richard White calls an organic machine, which means they are heavily infrastructured and turned into a sort of this wonderful expression, an organic machine. However, I think Danube, there are how shall I put it? What's the word I'm looking for? There are not scales, but obviously Rhine is 100% an organic machine. Danube has its parts where it's still not as heavily infrastructured as Rhine. So that would be one one thing I would like to point out. Second, always states, or almost always states, are involved in these large infrastructures. It doesn't have to be sort of this kind of centralized, like Chinese, big centralized state. Can be a supra-state, like the Danube Commission was and did a lot of infrastructure work on the Danube, and it was not just one state; it was a sort of a network also of states and engineers and so on and so forth. So, but state always plays an important role. On border and infrastructure. This is absolutely fascinating. Stelos Sherban, actually, just like a few days ago, he published a book on everyday border between Romania and Bulgaria, because it's a long story. I'll cut it very short. The border should be the Talveg, which is this imaginary line drawn on the deepest points of the river, any river, since late 18th century. That's an international sort of international understanding of borders between two riparian states. But of course, this is not fixed. This is very fluid. It moves because the islands along of the Danube, they move also. So this is moving, and you will never have a fixed border when is about a river, right? Because of the dynamics of the river, this will always move, and of course that will create a lot of conflicts and between local people, fishermen especially, and the police, border, and other authorities. This is actually a fascinating topic, and Stelu Sherban and I, we have many ethnographic and historical materials on that. We hope to maybe publish a book or several articles on this particular issue. But I tell you, it's absolutely fascinating. I don't want to take the just me to answer. So Luma, if you want to answer to other things, then I can come back to or help you if you yeah.
Thank you so much for the comments. Maybe just ironically, I mean, the book is already written, but I can, we can pretend somehow to think about it. I mean, I think the main answer, and that's not an excuse. I mean, I think coherence was for us quite important. That's why we kind of focused on floods and left, droughts out of it, epidemics out of it, because and although we tried to have all this diversity, we still try to make it, coherent. And there are quite a few stories that definitely have been left out. This multi-species aspect, actually, we have here and there certain hints. Milica Prokic has some hints there, but I think maybe a different volume or a different book could dive into this. I think what Cosmin said at the beginning, this very the further we come to to the 21st century, we have more and more institutions, more and more organizations, and all these conflicts between the way you mentioned irrigation, fisheries, land management, water management, conservation will come later, renaturation will come even later. So to focus on all these aspects is also something that could have been done more, but we haven't. The other maybe aspect that Herr mentioned, how this quintessential Dutch example of local very much localized and very much, from one generation, passed from one generation to the other, is a very stark contrast to the story we are telling, that a state from outside comes and takes over. It doesn't. I think if we would have, broadened the focus, we would have found some other examples. I always, at least from my Romanian example that I had in the mid of the 18th century, this is what the question that I always asked: why how did they need somebody from outside to tell them that they have to hire a person that should live next to the dam and should, report every day how high the water is? Yeah, and of course I think they had somebody like this, but because of the overlapping of state building measures and retreat of the Ottomans, somehow the Romanian state, and I think many of these young states, intervened into an aspect that previously was done by local communities. And I'm sure that still there is a lot of work that had continued to be done by the local communities, but and maybe we overemphasize this state interventions and so on. That would be one aspect. And very shortly to the Rhine, because I teach in Germany as well. Everybody asks me about Rhine. On the time frame, definitely the Danube lags behind the Rhine. The István Széchenyi, the Hungarian reformer, goes to Bingen to see what did the Prussians do there to apply it to Hungary, to apply it to the Iron Gates. On the other hand, if the river as such in the 20th century, middle to late 20th century, the Rhine is the quintessential industrialized river. But if we look at the Danube in the Eastern Bloc, it's not that different actually. It's maybe smaller in scale, but we shouldn't, all this big projects, all the what the Constantin Iordache talked about, the canal, but also lots of, Stefan as well and Stelu Sherban talked about, how the Danube and the whole energy production in Romania are interlinked. And I think that it's a bit misleading to take the view of the current state of Constanța and the Danube, where it is definitely lagging significantly behind. And I think also when we go back to the 19th century, the grain trade, it had maybe it was always smaller than the Rhine, but it had the same, proto-industrial, industrialized, changing from trade patterns that were also global to energetic patterns to, the coal was also transported as on the Rhine. So I think, just to look through the deindustrialization from today back to the Danube and compare it to Rotterdam, it's, I think, a little bit unfair.
If I may interject here, I think I haven't responded to frictions question. And you just remind me that we should have cited this excellent book. We didn't. It's our fault. In the introduction, at least. The thing is, we pinpointed three directions of disturbance, and one was, infrastructure built as a response to Danube's disturbance through floods mainly, but also large infrastructure built by state to tame the river, which was the disturbance was not necessarily, a destructive one, but the fact that, world economy started to be interconnected, and the flows should have been, shipped through the Danube, and Danube was not allowing that, because we know from Luma's book on the works of the Iron Gate. So that's the part where we should have, frictions, because there are a lot of contradictory, in a way, processes here. So there is the Danube Commission trying to to deepen and to do a lot of infrastructural work to allow the navigation from west to east, and from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, and through the Danube, through the Black Sea, to the world. But at the same time, there were other processes, like, and I think Constantin Ardeleanu points that in his chapter as well, where the national state, Romanian national state, had an interest in fishing and fishing infrastructure, which not necessarily went the same direction with the Danube Commission. So this kind of frictions you can meet, and yeah, you're right to point out here on this one. And on the species, breaking the levees, I had some very short en passant reference to this small rodent which is doing nests in dens in the levees. And of course, jackal right now, jackal is the main enemy in Romania for many reasons. And one of the reasons is that it also makes dents in the levees. And a thing I would like also to mention, because we have forefathers on which we lean this book, and I personally lean a lot on Don Worster's work, which is absolutely fabulous. And from him, I learned many things, but one thing was, look always to the if you deal with nature, rivers, whatever, look also at the ecological side, because this is very important. That helps you to ask the right questions from historical perspective, from anthropological perspective. Nevertheless, this kind of return to interdisciplinarity is so important. And yeah, I totally I owe so much to Donald Worster, which probably is the most important historian alive, at least in the US, if not in the world. So yeah, I'm stopping here.
Would anyone like to react to any of the interventions? If not, I would like also to address one question to Stefan. So in your chapter, you mentioned, I would switch a bit the focus, this time on the method. You mentioned that you did the participatory observation, right? But then again, you reveal a sort of a paradox, right? Because you were not there during the floods themselves. Now, what are the strengths and the limits of this approach? If you could expand on this very situation, how can we approach, and what would be the strengths and limits?
Obviously, as an anthropologist, because I always say I have two hats. One is an anthropologist, the other one is environmental historian. But as an anthropologist, of course, I would like to be there to observe myself, which is not possible, especially in the disaster. If you study disasters, it's virtually impossible. I would probably run for saving my life, not to ask questions and observe what people do in case of such a big flood. But it is still nevertheless important for two things. One, you see post factum, right? I talk about the 2006 flood, and the first field work was 2013, and I came back in a repeated way to rust and I had two postdocs working there. I visited them. I worked with them there in two different projects. So obviously, the memory of people is extremely strong. Is very much alive, and that proves you how bad it was. That was a shock, and people still have very vivid memories. And the way when you interview them or just talk with them, you see that clearly the emotions which come back every single time. And we also the fieldwork was also important because we did the participatory mapping, which is based on the satellite image. I'm not sure if we have time to expand, but this is a way of grasping the kind of geographical senses of people and what happened of the event itself, because I think an important thing in my chapter is that it is a sort of the memory of the land and what was before, and how everyone basically missed that or misread the landscape big time, especially the politicians and those who were in charge with kind of dealing with the situation, right? So they totally misread or even totally ignored this thing, although people said, well, previous floods actually followed the same small ditches like in 2006, and we knew that. So local people knew that, but nobody paid attention to them, of course. This is one of the many cases in which experts do not pay attention to local knowledge, local people. They say, well, they ordinary people, we have the knowledge, we know what we have to do. Well, it turned out they didn't. So in these cases, anthropology is a powerful knowledge tool, but also political in a way, because you look at the politics regarding a flood, this disaster, which is never an event, is a process. You look at this process called flood with different eyes, and you see the naked politics in a way, engaging anthropological tools. And I think this could be very powerful tool.
Thank you very much. On this note, dear listeners, in case the arguments convinced you, you should check the book. The link is provided on the RevDem webpage and on the publisher's website. Don't forget, it's an open access book, so you can consult it for free. Let us keep in touch. Please subscribe if you have not already done so to our media channels for more information about our regular events. Stay tuned and keep in touch.